Well, here I am, present in all my glory, as one might assume. I don't really have a lot to say. I mean, I'm frankly just streaming so I can... Well, calling this a model is a bit strong. Hand puppet. Calling this hand puppet a thing. Hey, I can move side to side, that's right. But no, my camera is not. And that's fucked up. That's real fucked up. Okay, anyway, jokes aside, what do I have to say? I don't know. I'm not sure, I didn't plan any of this. I hope the music that's playing in the background from an event that's happening, and they're absolutely blasting it outside, is not coming across on the video. I really do hope. Because otherwise it's gonna be very funky. Very funky indeed. Oh my god. Very funny. Let's just see if I can fix this in Lines. Where are you? Model, and then try to fix the white outlines. Right, give it a bit. It's gonna have to take something. Alright. Yeah, we back. We are back indeed. Okay, that should be... It's a bit less noticeable, I guess. Doesn't really control for winking, presumably. Well, that's not the worst thing in the world. I guess it's not good, don't get me wrong. It's not awful. Yeah, I guess I ought to go into a bit of history of the model. So, basically, I had this model cooking up for like, what's gonna be a year soon. Made it very quickly, obviously. It's not some kind of grandiose work. Funnily enough, I am moving around with my hands a lot. I speak with my hands, obviously. Southern Mediterranean, well, Serbia isn't really a Mediterranean country, but it's definitely culturally in that region. So when I'm trying to speak, unsurprisingly, my hands are often involved. The issue obviously being that it doesn't work a lot of the time. Maybe I can get a camera capture device. I actually can. I actually fucking can, eh? Maybe I can apply rotation, use hardware decoding when available. Capture only audio. Capture audio only. Capture desktop audio. I guess who cares? I guess I could attempt to just... Where is it? I hate the... Give me a minute. Right, I'm back. Hopefully the cherry ASMR didn't work too well. YouTube studio camera? Well, that's definitely not what I was supposed to be showing. You take your video, I guess that's reasonable. Camera control, zoom focus, pan, left, right, flow, light compensation, yes, okay. Gain, contrast, full, okay. Configure crossbar, what the fuck is that even supposed to mean? 720 bucks. Sure. Does that do anything? Not really, no. I guess it doesn't. Probably because the camera isn't used by another program. Well, I guess you're just gonna have to accept that I'm speaking a lot with my hands and that a lot of that isn't coming across. Which is fucked up, but really, what can you do? So I'm not sure if the way my camera is positioned, I'm not sure it's coming across particularly well. Who knows? Who fucking knows at this point, eh? Well, I mean, it's fine, don't worry about it. I'm not gonna think about it, and frankly, the less I think about it, the better. So, I guess I should stop fapping about which I've been doing for the last 5 minutes, and actually attempt to speak on some subject. What are you on about? Oh yes, the model. Right. So the model's been in the works for about a year at this point. Arguably more. Arguably less. I mean, I had a model, then I scrapped it, then I made this one. And actually making it only took about 3 to 4 weeks. You have to keep in mind that I never made a model before that point, so 3 to 4 weeks was not a bad time. If all went according to plan, I would have been streaming with a model somewhere around early October. Unfortunately, things did not go to plan in any meaningful measure, and I ended up having to wait a while. Problems with my credit card, with funding, with VTube Studio of all things, and getting into work, getting a suitable webcam. I don't think it's particularly capturing well the fact that I'm in a relatively low light environment, obviously because I want the screen to be the main source capturing like actual footage, I guess. So there was a lot of difficulty, and I'm not going to pretend I pushed particularly hard in some attempt to, you know, what should I say? In some attempt to force, I guess, if you will, this to happen. But it's here. The less I think about the hassle I went through, the better, because really it was just a lot of waiting. It's not like anything particularly difficult happened. It's just I waited a while. I had to wait. It wasn't really a choice I had to make. And so that's kind of how it ended up. Which is fine. I mean, I'm not trying to give the impression here that I undertook some Herculean effort. As you can see by the model, it's very rough. Very, very rough, especially in full motion. The lack of a crossway on the face beyond... Oh, you can see the camera fucking up. The lack of a crossway on the face is definitely notable. Also the fact that my character is very, very jiggly. I'm actually trying to learn like 2D physics for that, so I could, you know, maybe jiggle a little bit, because I am ultimately a... Oh, snakes do actually have spines, funnily enough. They're not extremely jiggly, but, you know, it's a snake. I'm supposed to be... Well, actually, I'm supposed to be a skink, you know that? I'm supposed to be a skink, a sneaky skink. Obviously, I'm not. At least not in the current position. I mean, I have the arms and legs of the model somewhere. Presumably, it would take some while to get them working. And I'm honestly not sure tracking would be particularly good, because obviously they're two-dimensional, but your hands move in 3 dimensions, so it's kind of questionable how that will work. Maybe, arguably, I could use, like, 3D hands, and then a 2D model. Arguably. I mean, that would come out very weird, but then again, it might work. I mean, the model is already quite weird, let's not pretend otherwise here. It's debilitating weird. Alright, give me a minute. Alright, yep. I'm back. I'm very back. I guess I could show some of the actual footage that went, well, not footage, but stuff that happened whilst I was attempting to make my model, and, you know, the references I had. I guess I could do that in Krita, probably. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's just open it all up in Krita. so I can actually showcase what's happening. Ooh, it's not liking this. Oh, it's very much not liking this. Ugh. What the fuck is that doing? Anyway. Wait while Krita attempts to lug its geriatric ass into working. This isn't working too well, Chief. Chief Dingus Dungus of the Ting Tong Ding Dong tribe. You are accused of being a motherfucker. Oh good, it's pretending to open. Give it a minute. Give it a bit more. Listen, Creed is not famous for being good. Alright, there you go, we're in. Okay, game capture. Where is Krita? Is it gonna do that stupid fucking thing? Where it's gonna do that as usual. Okay. So apparently it just doesn't window capture, I presume? Okay, so for some reason it captures Krita now. Motherfucker. Why? Window capture is attempting to show... Well, fuck me then. Well, fuck me, I guess. I guess I gotta move myself up. Is this visible? How does this work? No, it's not. No, it's fucking not. Why is it capturing like that? Yes, okay, why would you ever capture anything else? It's... Why is it capturing OBS of all fucking things? What am I supposed to say? It's amazing, wow. Wow. I guess I really am at a loss for fucking words. Guess you're just stuck with this dog shit. Yeah, no, it just doesn't... That is extraordinarily aggravating. And, okay, now you can fucking capture, you imbecilic. Oh. Okay, anyway. Here's the model. Here's the references. I think my fat ass blocking the way. As you can see, once you actually start looking at it, this obviously is a prototype. I didn't, this is a prototype. As you can see, a lot is different from that version and the one you're currently seeing, obviously, change of perspective. Obviously the lack of arms there, and the chevrons were initially supposed to go down my side, but then I decided, nah, that's stupid. So they just go up my back. Also the top thingy-majiggy, for lack of a better word. So this is the actual, the dude. This do be the dude. And he do be dooping. He blah, 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 blah. As you can see, it's very heavily based on this skink I found. If you can't see the similarities, I don't blame you. But the poses there, the arms are actually in very similar locations. Probably the most definitive part that I actually took is the two-tone color of that skink. Because obviously, I have that two-tone, where one is just a solid brass color. And yeah, it is brass. I at least try to make it brass. And then obviously you have that secondary color, which is my belly, or rather my underside, which is much lighter. And that's obviously to give a bit of visual contrast, because otherwise it would be very intensely orange to the point that you couldn't really tell it in any meaningful capacity. Um, Also helps differentiate the upper and lower jaw a lot more. I frankly enjoy it mostly. Um, so that those were the references that really quite heavily. Give me a minute. All right, it's fine. Right, so you can see the Snake Man from Elden Ring is also an inspiration. Mainly just to see how a snake with arms even looks. Answer is not very good. I decided not to again animate the arms because they would have had very limited mobility and it would have been difficult to actually implement. And then obviously you could see the just brown snake, which is just, you know, my idea of what it should have been. And where is the thing that I'm trying to find? There are older models of my character, just to be clear. This, for instance, is one of them. Give it a minute, it's not... It's dying. There you go. There you go. That is a really old model of my character. Like a really, really old model. That was one of the prototypes. This is at the point where it's still green, by the way. Which is a very... I decided to change the color scheme very early, but you can see the idea was always to have it... At this point, it was much more explicitly lizard-like than the mostly snake-like character I have today. You can obviously see some elements still remained, like the fangs, for instance, and the forked tongue, but other elements are very notably different. Also, another thing that you can see survived is the nose holes. They're still there. Obviously, with a snake, they're not actually nose holes. They're sensory pits for heat seeking. Actually, funnily enough, my model is kind of a sidewinder, which I guess does make sense for you know, the fact that it's that I mainly play aircraft in War Thunder, and a lot of my content is around aircraft. So I guess me being a sidewinder, or at least a heat-seeking snake, is thematically appropriate, if nothing else. But yeah, as you can see, at this early stage, it's very obvious that my model is much more lizard-like, especially by the fact that it is green at this point still. I pretty quickly decided it just doesn't make sense for my model to be green. It didn't mesh, the neon green just didn't look right, unfortunately. So I decided pretty early on to go for the channel colors, which, you know, in case you haven't been paying attention, my model and my emblem have the same colors, actually. It's made explicitly so that they look similar. You know, the brass and purple, or rather burgundy, that's the color. It's called ultraviolet, and I guess it could technically be a kind of violet, but it's not. It's burgundy. It's brass and burgundy. I pretty quickly settled on the fact that there are few... Well, there are green snakes and lizards, but they're less common than the brown variety. And so that's one thing. Another thing, of course, is I don't think it would match the channel. That's also why I dropped the overall design. It's just too cartoony, frankly. And I don't mean it's bad, but you can see it's a very intensely cartoony model. This is a very early stage, but you can see even by then I realized, hey, these big eyes that pop out at you and this very exaggerated snout, That doesn't really work, does it? You can see my model is relatively cartoony. It's not anthropomorphic in the sense that it's human-like. The actual attempted model is a lot more anthropomorphic. What the fuck have you opened? Piss off. What? Why is it doing that? Close the program. Close the program, motherfucker. Thank you. So, you can see at this earlier stage, obviously, it's a lot more anthropomorphic, but also it's a lot more cartoony. And I thought about it. Now, there are trade-offs and benefits to a cartoony model. For one, obviously for a gameplay channel, it might be more appealing to children. But I'm not particularly interested in having a large child audience. I'm not explicitly an, rated 18 plus streamer, but having a young audience, especially a very young audience, just isn't something I'm particularly deeply interested in. So I felt that having a very cartoony model might work against what I'm trying to get across, for lack of a better word. Also, my model with the snake looks a bit more grounded, for lack of a better word, and I think that's A, easier to animate, and B, it's easier to mesh into the scene, for lack of a better word. This is a very stand-out-ish, attention-grabbing model. You do not see this thing and say, huh, that is a subtle design. That cartoon model jumps out at you. You are not gonna miss that model. Like, that ain't happening, Maka. And so the result of that is that it kind of dominates the scene. And okay, that's good for getting attention, but then if you're making gameplay or something, it's easy for it to so heavily dominate the scene with the bright colors and the very expressive features that it actually starts subtracting, especially because I'm not an artist, nor am I a modeler, or a rigger rather. The result being that this model is quite rough and quite crude. Unfortunate, but not surprising. I do think the pivot over to this much more, I'm not going to say realistic model, but a lot more focused, let's go with model, probably was the better choice ultimately. It was easier to animate. It meant that somebody with limited experience like me could reasonably stand a chance of animating it. And it also kind of focused more intensely on what I actually wanted from a model, more so than just being a model, which is good, which is very good. I can actually see if I have something more in here. Aha, yes, I do actually have a later version of the cartoony model around the time I gave up on it, funnily enough, so I guess I may as well show it. No reason not to, really. It's not like I lose anything from showing it. I'm not going to use it. This was the actual model that I had, well, not this explicit model, but I started to work on this model. And you can see I'm dividing the areas. So, for instance, neck, obviously, head, which is supposed to be one region, but now that I know it, it had to be separate because these bits need to be independent of each other. That gave me a lot of difficulty, so, you know. You can see the upper palate and the lower mouth. You can see I wasn't really sure how I was going to mesh that between. If I had to guess, I probably would have cut it, like, here, thereabout, so I can get a nice mouth. But that's kind of the one downside with this really pronounced snout I have. You can see my model, my current model, is basically the head isn't really a head, it's just two lobes that rotate contraposition. Like, the lower one rotating more, but the upper one very much rotates a lot. And you can see, when I open my mouth, the upper palate, the skull, goes up as well. It's not just the jaw that's going up or down. Um, and animating that snout would have been quite difficult in comparison because you had a static element head, and then you had the palate, which are dynamic elements, and it worked, but it was kind of inelegant. Same with the neck. I wasn't quite sure how much neck sway I wanted. Maybe the model can move its head like here or here. Ultimately, I decided against that, but I should note this model was cut, was made, and started to be put into you can even see the older green parts, but at this point you can see I switched over into the a combination that would be more recognizable now, I guess, than my earlier model. Well, a better word. And you can see at this point I'm using the Elden Ring Snake Man as a strong influence. You could see the longer I work, the more and more intensely my model starts to copy from the Snake Man. Now, ultimately, it isn't the same, obviously. There are some very big differences between my model currently and these prototype phases and the Snake Man from Elden Ring. But you can see there are similarities, and they start to creep up more and more. Firstly, the color, secondarily, the overall body shape. At this point, you can see my character is very barrel-shaped. It's almost crocodile-like, especially when it's green. It frankly resembles more crocodile than a snake or a skink, especially because it's a stubby body with a big tail, which is not something you really see on a snake or a skink, because their body and tail segments are really separate entities. The result of that, obviously, is that as the model progresses and I take more influences from the Snake Man, I also start to change, especially the head, because that's the biggest change. And you can see with my current model, the eyes are not in front anymore. They're to the side. You can only see my right eye. Well, the right eye of the model, anyhow. Funny story, I guess. It's actually tracking. Well, you're seeing the model's left eye because obviously it's in a pseudo 2/3 position. In reality, it actually breaks perspective very strongly. My model. That's because I'm not good at drawing in perspective, but nominally at least, it's in a kind of 2/3 semi-profile position. Kason, if you've seen her, has a model that's vaguely in a similar pose. Obviously, she's an actual anime character and I'm a snake, but the same idea. So what you're seeing is my model's left eye, but I'm blind in the left eye, which means I don't have a lot of fine control over it and can sometimes go wonky. And oftentimes it's kind of half closed. The result of that is obviously attempting to get the inputs of the facial capture from VTube Studio from my left eye to animate the left eye of the model, and what that just wouldn't work. So actually what you can see my model is doing, well actually you could see if I had a webcam on, obviously the webcam is busy transmitting to VTube Studio, but if I had it, you could see that it's tracking my right eye. The model is tracking my right eye, which is the left eye of the model. You'd see I'm currently winking, but it looks like I'm closing my eye. That's because I'm closing my right eye, obviously, but my left eye is still open. The result is obviously a bit better because my right eye is generally a lot more useful and makes a lot more sense to track it. Same with my face, although obviously the face is much broader, so it's not as important, but it's prioritizing the right side of my face over my left so it gets better input. What are you doing, baby? I'm just playing with my eyebrows. The one thing that is capturing from my left eye is my eyebrow. It's not working very well. My left eye you can see the model's what's supposed to be the model's right eye, or rather right eye lobe, because it's obviously sticking out the head, um, is actually moving, and unlike the eye, it is actually tracking from my left eyebrow. Granted, the tracking seems to be rather doo-doo. But it should at least theoretically be capable of moving independently. Theoretically is the operative word in that sentence. Anyway, I guess that's enough story about the model. I don't think I have the I animated obviously everything on my laptop because it works with the drawing tablet. For some reason my computer, so the thing I'm currently streaming on, doesn't work too well with the drawing tablet, so it just doesn't. I decided it was easier to just bite the bullet and not use it, and I think I was correct in that. What the fuck? Anyway, I guess that's that. That's enough Krita. No Krita. No Krita, you are not allowed to capture this audio and video as well. What was that about? Something, presumably. Okay, so that features the I talk about my model for half an hour. Finishes, I should say. The I talk about my model for half an hour section of the video. Now let's go into I rant about historiography. Historiography, obviously, refers to, well, the name says it all, really. Historia means in Greek history, and graphe means to write or to report. So historiography means the writing of history, effectively, and that's the actual job a historian does, if you ever wondered. Because obviously a doctors, a physicist calculates physics. What does a historian do? The correct answer to that isn't history, because history is the concept of the past, and also the record of the past, funnily enough, in English. But what it is historiography. Your job as a historian is historiography. You write history, or what's at least supposed to be history. And there are obviously two separations of what historiography consists of. There is more academically inclined historiography, which is give me a minute. Alright, so in historiography, the more academic, proper kind of historiography obviously is stuff that is meant to push our understanding of science nominally. In practice, obviously, not really, it doesn't. It doesn't really a lot of the time. A lot of historiographical work is just compilation and summation of already existing works, which is important. I'm not trying to deride anybody's work because, haha, they dared to not make something entirely and completely original, if such a thing could even exist. But, you know, the history in the kind of historiography in the most intense sense of the word refers pretty exclusively to the academic sphere, so the kind of stuff that other academics would be interested in reading. Not something really that the general public in and of itself is definitely interested in. Which makes sense, obviously. Why wouldn't it? But it's the main so-called prestigious part of writing history, or writing rather historiography, because you can't write history. That is works like, that's not to say that some explicitly academic works are not immensely popular in the popular consciousness, far from it. I mean, Professor Fukushima? No, what's his name? Oh god, he he used to teach. Actually, I think he's still actively teaching at the University of Skopje. What's the man's name? Fuck me. The professor who wrote the New Theory of History, basically the end of history. The book is called. Quite famously misused, obviously, largely because people don't understand what it means, but what he was trying to put across. But still, what he was trying to put across. But like that, Spangler's work also, the idea of civilization is important. Additionally, Georgy Ostrogorsky's work, The History of Byzantium, is also immensely popular. There are historical academic works which are used in an academic capacity that have breached popular culture and that are important, obviously, amongst the right-wing elements of society. Spangler's work is quite popular. For better or worse, meaning worse, because for when it's just Spangler's work is kind of, I'm not gonna say outdated, but his theory is kind of out on its own, and it's kind of been considered not necessarily outdated or obsolete, because there are still historians very closely clinging to it, but methodologically it's, at least in my humble opinion, so unimaginably broad as to be utterly meaningless. You know, by the time you get to the concept of a civilization, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes with my hands, not that you can see them, but by the time you get to the concept of civilization, it's so comedically broad that really you could say anything is a definitive part of civilization. Like, what defines Western civilization? Spangler says Christianity, largely the current modern interpretation, is this Judeo-Christian idea, which I have a lot of problems with. Just, I guess I could go on tangent. Okay, so I just need to remind myself. Come back to Spangler. So, among the right-wing circles, say right-wing, I don't like using the terms left-wing and right-wing mostly, because they're just not accurate to the actual realities of political life, insofar as right-wing and left-wing encompass similar and extremely dissonant ideologies within themselves. So it's kind of stupid, like, comparing, I don't know, something that's obsolete these days, like conservatism or classical liberalism, which is typically considered right-wing and reactionary, to Nazism and fascism, is just stupid, because obviously those ideologies share a common socialist ancestry, and so are very different from classical liberalism, libertarianism, objectivism, all the stupid ideologies, and also all the and they share a lot more in common with what's typically considered left-wing, which is like the broad family of socialist ideologies. So the term just isn't particularly accurate, but it's just so popular and ever-present that you can't really speak of politics without it. If only for the fact that the people doing politics and writing about them like the terms, despite the fact that they're broadly incorrect and that they're not really useful for much. But anyway, on the right wing, and I do mean the reactionary neoconservative development, that is the popular kind of conservatism that's emerged in the past 10 years in force, I'd say 20, like, as of recent, in full. That kind of popular conservatism that kind of initially started with events like the Tea Party, although that's much more libertarian than it is populist in the same sense it is today. That circle of politics has really latched onto not so much Spangler's idea of history and his methodology for doing history, obviously, attempting to categorize historical events by civilization and attempting to say that conflicts ultimately and history, thusly in and of itself, emerges from civilizational rifts, as he calls it. Obviously, in Spangler's theory, there's a few civilizations and it changes depending on who you ask. And conflict and a lot of history emerges as the result of conflict between these civilizations, which are obviously at each other's throats. For instance, Western civilization is often imagined to be in contrast to this nebulous idea of Eastern European civilization, which is defined by not being Western most of the time if you actually read Spangler's work. Obviously, being a writer in the early 20th century, he had a fair few opinions that didn't age too well, but you know, the idea of the great conflict between East and West was starting to emerge and become popular, and obviously with Bolsheviks taking power in Russia, it became very popular, and then during the Cold War, it basically became dogma and norm. You also have things like the Buddhist or the Indian civilization, the Sinitic civilization, which sometimes includes but doesn't necessarily include the Japanese. And the idea, basically, is that at these rift zones, like the Balkans, like Germany, like places like Africa, for instance, or the Himalayas, you get conflict, and that all future conflict, or rather all conflict, ultimately comes from this civilizational clash. That's not really, obviously, that the main issue with Spangler's theory, at least in my eyes, is that it's overly reductivist to the point that it makes these extremely broad categories, which just don't make any sense ultimately. They're so unimaginably broad that you can argue that China is technically Western, because a hallmark of Chinese civilization is breathing oxygen, and that's key to a Western civilization as well. Obviously, I'm being asinine about it currently, but the criticism still stands. By the time you're making concepts as broad as civilization, you are very much pushing what can be categorized without completely reducing the substance of it down to something that's functionally unusable. But, you know, what can you say? Spangler's theory was very much a product of its time, a product of the early 20th century, where basically Rankiest methodology starts to fall out of fashion. Slowly, but does. And although Romanticism has been surpassed in the methodological sense, nationalism is still all the rage. So obviously everything is oriented around the nation. Now, I have very big problems with any collectivist theory of history, i.e. that presumes that collectives, not individuals, are drivers of historical action. Which is actually something I come into conflict with, even with the group of historiographic methodologies founded obviously by the Annales and by the French school of Annales in the early 20th century, which is the procedural theory that says basically that processes are the main drivers of force. But that school, I think, rightly recognizes that is a methodological framework and tool and is not necessarily reflective of reality. Ultimately, at least in my mind, the ultimate driver of historical action is man. It's in singular, not men. It's individual people's reaction to things that drives what we would consider history. Obviously, extraneous events happen, but ultimately history is defined by how people react to them, not so much by them in and of itself. In and of themselves, I guess. So, the procedural theory is very useful, obviously, because the concept of processes, especially the long-acting processes, or long-term processes, is a way to bridge the fact that the human mind effectively is limited. Like, yeah, sure, if you're trying to be as accurate as possible, you need to reduce all of history to individual action. But the issue is trying to piece together all the individual actions that every single person throughout history has made to create a narrative would be nigh on impossible. Not even for lack of evidence, even if you somehow can manage to accurately record everything so that you can make a narrative out of it, doing so just isn't within human possibility. So we use these abstractions, these methods, these processes to attempt to get a hold and a grip of that, of all those individual human actions, which are generalized, and yes, on some level reduced, obviously, their nuances reduced, but they're still broadly useful. And then those processes are what drives historical events and happenings. That's useful. Another big development of the 20th century within historiography, and really historiography, like a lot of social sciences, is pretty much turned entirely on its head during the 20th century, is the postmodern theory, effectively. And what does postmodern mean? Well, again, if you're on the right wing, again, I'm using the term right-wing side of politics, postmodern has just become a generalized slur against against anybody that does something you don't like. In reality, postmodern refers to the fact that a lot of historical sciences have recognized that the methodologies and methods they use are not descriptive of broader reality. They're tools, fundamental. They're useful, but they are not substance in and of themselves. It's the same realization that physics had once it moved past the general theory of relativity, which is all models are false, all our tools are false, some are just more useful than others. And that's ultimately something that postmodern, so current historiographic theory and methodology, tries to force. The idea that you can see all these tools that we use, for instance, the concept of processes, or in Spengler's works, civilization, or in Marx, it's the concept of class struggle. All of these are not historical realities, they're historical constructs. They're human-made historical constructs that are useful for gaining a historical narrative, but in and of themselves are not correct. They necessarily cannot be. We know they are not correct, but they are useful. It's in the same way that modern-day physics very keenly understands that the relativistic model, or hell, even the current new standard model of physics, that is the norm, just doesn't work. There are clearly places where it fails, where it's very clear that something ain't right, and it either has to be thrown out wholesale or reinvented to the point that it's no longer recognizable. But that doesn't mean you simply throw the baby out with the bathwater. The simple realization is, yes, our tools are flawed and limited, but that doesn't mean they're bad. It's just we need to recognize that they're flawed and limited. Much in the same sense that throughout the 19th and 20th century, as historical, I say scientific thought, basically the reaction to the prevalence of historical romanticism via the emergence of the positivist movement primarily, so people like Auguste Comte, but also Max Weber, and the development of sociology as a science, basically forced historians to reckon with the fact that they are not unbiased third parties separate from the universe that have an accurate description and consideration of it. They are parties in it. They have a horse in this race, and that everybody's opinion is biased to some extent. It could be more biased, it could be less biased. But you are always going to have bias. Bias is something that is inherent to humans that you can't work away from. And that you need to the best of your abilities anyhow, state and account for, basically. And then Ranke's philosophy is kind of very heavily built on that idea. Great man theory and all that, but the real advancement in Ranke's philosophy, basically, or Ranke's historiography, that basically pushes science, pushes history into what we would consider a science, quote unquote, these days, is that Ranke uses the term living in history or personifying history, I guess. I don't know how you translate it into English because obviously I've been taught in Serbian. But the idea that you need to immerse yourself in the history and that you can't view history from the point of yourself in your current present, but that you must divorce yourself to the best extent that you can and look at it from the context and realities of the people living there. It's something, for instance, that a lot of popular historical historiography, I guess. So historiography not meant for academic use, but mainly just for a broader audience, fails to do. And that's obviously take it from the perspective of the world. For instance, I know the Aztecs are a good example. Were the Aztecs evil? Yeah, they did a lot of fucked up shit. They were absolutely terrible. And Montezuma, for instance, the last Aztec emperor, did a lot of terrible stuff. I mean, the Aztecs basically took the institution of human sacrifice, which was well established in Mesoamerica at the time, and turned it to such an industrial scale that they actually started depopulating the fucking region. Which, for a pre-modern society, is a feat of fucking terror, really, if we're being honest with each other. But you need to account, even with the extreme extent of human sacrifice, the practice of human sacrifice within the Mesoamerican world was already well established by the time the Aztecs came. Sure, they turned it up to 11, or rather, they turned it up to 11, they turned it up to 11 again, and then they kept turning the knob until it broke, basically. But saying that Montezuma is evil is okay because objectively, you know, sacrificing kids and literally hundreds, thousands of people is never good, no matter what you believe in. But he wasn't exceptionally evil by the standards of his time, especially by the standards of an Aztec ruler. So that's kind of what you need to do. If you're trying to write about Montezuma and you're trying to justify him as the Antichrist, well, that's just not being true to history, because yes, he did a lot of fucked up shit, but in the context of the society and world in which he lived in, those deeds are not exceptionally evil. So attempting to paint a picture of Montezuma as some kind of cruel tyrant or an evil despot who eats children and kills children, because the Aztecs did sacrifice children, is not correct. Not because they didn't do that, because that ignores the context in which that was happening. That Montezuma wasn't uniquely evil. He did what was, in the society of his time, considered, I wouldn't say normal, but acceptable, let's say. Or same with Julius Caesar, for instance. When people talk about the genocide of the Gauls, the harrowing of Gaul, obviously during his conquest, they rightly know that by every standard today, that was a genocide, and that he enacted immense amounts of suffering primarily to just further his own political ambitions. And anybody who denies that is just lying, obviously. It's absolutely the case. He did do that. But then you need to take to mind that what he did, whilst definitely evil by modern standards, wasn't uniquely evil for the time. If you captured the land, it was usually understood that you were to enslave it and to kill anybody who could resist. That's just, unfortunately, how it worked back in the day. I'm not saying it's good, but just how it worked. So when attempting to say that Caesar was somehow uniquely evil, well, he wasn't. By the standards of the society and times he lived in, he wasn't uniquely evil. I mean, just take the Insurrections, for instance, or the many Gaulish rebellions. The Gauls had no issue with slaughtering civilians and enslaving Roman soldiers. But that was just the understanding of the time that once you conquer somebody, you enslave them. Same as when you take a city. You sack and conquer it, and you take everything that's valuable, and you enslave its population. Terrible by every standard, by every modern standard, and even people back in the day rightly recognized it as detestable, but they were the minority. In the cultures and societies in which those people were speaking out, that was the norm. The saying that Caesar did something bad is correct. Saying that he was somehow a uniquely evil political figure usually goes hand in hand with the idea that he was a tyrant. Isn't. Because it just isn't. We know that the historical reality of the time does not permit that to be the case. It just doesn't. He wasn't uniquely evil. He wasn't a good guy. I'm not trying to paint him as some kind of savior figure like certain, especially historical enthusiasts, like to latch onto him. But he isn't a uniquely evil figure either. When you're trying to say, was he or was he not, you need to look at the context of the society, and that's really what Ranke popularized as an idea. Obviously, Ranke's theory has a lot of shortcomings in and of itself. For one, great man theory is basically Ranke's theory. It dictates that the overall driver of historical events is individual great men, which is just not really correct to any meaningful extent. It's very clear that that's just not true. You know? And also the fact that Rankists fetishize primary documents, especially written documents, is also just incorrect, because they throw a lot of useful evidence that's oral, that's folk belief, that's still a useful source of information. Obviously can't be taken at face value, but still it's very useful, and they throw it away, and they over focus on primary historical written documents, which not only serves to limit the actual sources they can draw upon, but also just the idea of historicity in their mind is just not really that correct. Like, I'm not trying to say Ranke's political theories are regressive. It is by modern standards, but that's exclusively due to the fact that we, as historians, have massively progressed methodologically, mostly, to the point that it's just regressive these days to attempt to use Ranke's theory, because we've grown past it. Obviously, the thing that kind of was death nail in the coffin of Ranke's theory was very much the Annales school in the early 20th century, which melded these the developments of the later 19th century, which is material analysis, the concept of class, obviously in the Marxist image, because for all his failings, Marx was pretty much the first major intellectual figure, or at least the one who popularized material analysis as a form of history. Great man theory doesn't really bother itself with economy, basically. Funnily enough, it just bothers itself with pretty much political action, and by that war. By that I mean war, really. For most of history before the modern era, if you're talking about history, you're really just talking about the compendium of conflict. To the point that some German historians went as far as to say that the primary driver of historical political action is conflict. But would you look at that? Spangler didn't derive his ideas from a vacuum. Would you look at that? Obviously, that's not correct. Marx goes into the other fucking extreme, where it's like, everything is the result of material condition. Everything. There's no free will. Every single men are tabula rasa. And every single thing is a result of material condition, which is why capitalists are inherently evil. And, excuse me, I'm just trying to see how my model will track. And, the proletariat is good and all that. No, the many actual problems with Marxist theory that are metaphysical in nature are there, but it's undeniable that the idea of using material analysis, or rather the concept of material culture and analysis, not as a source, but as a historical entity to be studied in and of itself, he did popularize that. There's also figures like Weber, like Kant, like other important figures in sociology, and that new basically theory of work, the idea of social action, that the actions of men are explainable and predictable and that they can be studied. That's what sociology ultimately bases itself upon. And developments of what we would consider these days modern psychology, although calling anything in the 19th century psychology is, yeah. It's hopefully the music isn't coming across. It's very some debilitating retard is playing extremely loud music to the point that I'm gonna go mad. Excuse me. I'm just doing my own stuff currently. What was it on about? Something probably. What was it about? Yeah, the idea that material culture is something to be studied, not just a source of information, very much is a 19th slash early 20th century development. Uh, Marxism obviously plays an important role, but frankly, a lot of the actual conclusions that Marxists came to and Marxist theory itself is just not usable in a genuine historical sense because it's just not correct. I'm sorry to break it to you, it just ain't. But the idea that material conditions are something that is to be studied and their impact and influence on men is important, absolutely is to be studied. It's absolutely a worthy subject of study. It's just the way Marxists go about it. It's just completely ass backwards, basically. A real exemplar of that is it Brodel's? Yeah, it's probably Brodel's pretty much most famous work, and that's the Mediterranean world during the times of Philip II. A long book, very, very academically worded, not meant for general audience. That is basically a wind of change that completely sweeps Rankia's philosophy out the window. Oh, not really. It would be a strong, long struggle. Basically, the modern, or rather postmodern theory of history that pretty much all modern historiographical methods use, even in Western Europe, really would only become fully dominant in the 1960s, funnily enough. So, yeah. But that's really the beginning of those massive winds of change that the French school starts to bring in force, where it's postmodern, effectively. It recognizes the inherent inabilities of our methods and our tools, that they themselves are useful tools, but that they cannot be conclusions in and of themselves. That basically, in combination with the fact that it drives this development of sociology or other sociology adjacent stuff like broader concepts of culture, broader concepts of economy, how those interface with what's considered traditional historical action, which is like war and political intrigue and stuff, because really, for history before the 1960s, you're really talking about political and military history. It's pretty much everything else is entirely to the side, unfortunately. Which, unfortunate, but not unsurprising, I guess. I mean, you can see in the work, in the name of the actual work Brodel published, the world, or I think it's either the culture or the world of the Mediterranean during the time of Philip II. He uses economic analysis. He uses class structure, not in the Marxist sense, by the way, just the concept of class differentiation. He uses societal factors to explain a lot of the historical processes happening during this time, Not just that Philip II is the big man who decides everything. And that is basically kicking down the door of traditional rankist philosophy in saying, okay, what you're doing, what your goal is, not necessarily bad with the way you're going about it. Wrong, just wrong, just stop it. And obviously, doesn't immediately become norm. Actually, in the early days, the French school had a lot of critics from more reactionary elements. And they used reactionary not in the Marxist sense, but in the sense that they were trying to avert change within the methodological field of historiography. The, the, the theory in the French school of analysis is not immediately popular. Hell, even today, there are small exclaves of, I'm not going to say historians, but historical enthusiasts who write historical literature, historically themed publications, I guess, that still stick with the rankist model, where, you know, the archive is the only reliable source of documents, and if it's not from a fucking primary document, then it didn't happen. Yay. As you can see, I have a bone to pick with this theory. I don't. Obviously, as I've previously stated, recognize the massive importance rankist thought played in developing the modern historical, as much as I'm bereaved to call it that, but modern historical science of history, I guess. Then again, I can get into a whole other tangent about why, in my at least humble opinion, history isn't a science and should not be treated like a science. That it's much like philosophy, something beyond science. It obviously shares a lot of the fundamental similarities of science, but because of humans and the fact that they're necessarily irrational actors, you can't really use a lot of the. That's basically where procedural theory starts to fall apart. The fact that, you know, we recognize the processes are made up, they're historical constructions, they're not they're historical constructs. They're not in and of themselves necessarily accurate. They're just useful for getting a narrative built, for using this mass amount of information we have and getting a coherent narrative out of it. Because ultimately, your job as a historian isn't to just be some dumbass chronicler who staples together random fucking primary documents into something which vaguely exists as a book and then publishing it. Despite the fact that unfortunately some do still do that. Your job as a historian is to take all the information from those documents and from basically any source of information you can get, analyze them, use them as much as you can, basically divulge them, regurgitate them, and from that attempt to form a coherent narrative of what we would call history. Because ultimately, history is a social construct. I know a lot of the right-wing parts of the internet really hate the term social construct and the entire postmodern theory. But unfortunately, reality really doesn't give a shit about their opinion, and it's basically the case. History, in the conventional sense, can basically refer to three things. It can refer to history, the science, which is to say the thing historians do, which is more accurately called historiography because it's writing about history. It can refer to the past, as in something that happened in the past, which is why you say when somebody dies that he's history, obviously. You're not implying that he's been documented and written into a history book, you're saying that he's in the past, obviously doesn't exist in the present. But it also refers to our record of the past, or rather, not even our record of the past, our understanding of the record of the past. And your job as a historian is to make that understanding of the record of the past. Which is why you can't just cite primary source after primary source after primary source after primary source and say, hey, this is a history book. No, motherfucker. Your job is to take all of that and then combine it, make sense of it, and then give a historical, reasonable interpretation of what you think happened. That's your job. It isn't just to staple primary documents. That's something one of my professors, or actually a lot of my professors, taught us very rigidly in the first year of our studies. Your ass is not supposed to be paraphrasing primary documents, which is something that the historical enthusiasts obviously who lack all this training, basically. Fundamentally just master crafts training. Um, because I do consider history a craft, so a crafts training, you know. Hey, there's a reason why universities are basically just medieval guilds. Aren't they? Are medieval guilds. That they are actually modern versions of medieval guilds. Not in the sense they've been reinvented, but by the fact that they're the only surviving medieval guild beyond the stonemasons. But the stonemasons are a whole separate different thing. Basically, I have a lot of trades knowledge that has been taught to me from my professors who are masters in the field, obviously. Very well accomplished people, even if I do have a lot of differences in my consideration with some of them. I still recognize they're a lot more learned than my dumbass. But the thing that they very thankfully drilled into us is that your job as historian isn't just to get primary documents and then to make a page in which you say one word and then justify it with 14 different primary excerpts from a primary source. Nor is your job to quote primary sources. Your job here fundamentally I'm back. Sorry, a lot of interruptions today. Unfortunately, not anything I can change. Where was I? Oh yeah. Um, basically, your job as a historian isn't just to staple primary documents together and call it a day. Your job is to make to use those constructs that we know are constructs to make a coherent narrative and an interesting narrative as well. Your quality as a historian is not only just in the academic sense of how capable are you of analyzing the information more or less accurately, but also of how interesting you can make that, which is very important. Which is very, very important. Um, you know, a history book that nobody reads is a history book that was never written fundamentally. That's just the hard truth of it. If your ass cannot write, then you don't have a job as a historian, because your primary job is making a narrative. Not necessarily right. If you can't tell an interesting story, whether verbally, visually, or via audio, which is verbally, and visually also includes writing, so I guess visually or audibly. Don't think anybody has ever made a history with scent before. Well, none that you want to remember, anyhow. I mean, go to any anime expo, and you'll fucking see plenty of olfactory history, and you'll fucking beg you didn't. Anyway. But your job fundamentally is to make this narrative that we know isn't right, but it's the best understanding of what we know, and to make it interesting, and to make it something that people want to listen to, you fucking dumbass. Dipshit dumbass, I hate them, oh my god. And there you go, that's my, oh god, 40-minute long ramble about random inane nonsense, also known as every one of my streams. So there you go, hopefully you learned something interesting about history. I'll take the discussion of whether history is a science, or, in my opinion, better described as a trade, for another day, because not even I am stupid enough to get into that. At least, not without being prepared a bit. I guess I now do my favorite part, which is just randomly browsing the interwebs. We're gonna be randomly browsing the interwebs, as they say. There you go, Twitter. Let's go to Twitter. Let's see what's happening in Twitter. I love Twitter. That's my favorite side. Me? No. Me being racist? Could not be. I love Twitter. Twitter be favorite. Me making racist caricatures? Could not be. Or I guess X.com, but I don't think a living soul has called that site X.com. I think it would be a mark of great shame for anybody who does. Let's see what's going on. VTubers. I completely forgot my feed is like 80% of VTubers. I mean, I'm not complaining. I like it. But, yeah. Quite problematic. Messages. I don't have any messages. What the fuck? Is it showing on screen? No, it's not. I'm not using window capture. Fuck off with that. Let's see about... Ooh, yeah. Congress passed the fucking Big Bill. Which is its official name, by the way. Big Beautiful Bill. There you go. Here's the Big Beautiful Bill. The biggest turd Trump has somehow managed to crap out today. Hot off the presses, right directly into your mouth. Are we capturing? I think we are, hopefully. Welcome to video of me. Hi, welcome to the Big Beautiful Bill that just got passed. And it's going to be signed into law in a matter of hours. You can see it's passed the House, passed the Senate. Actually, it should pass the Senate, basically. It could only have been stopped in the House. Then the President, and then it becomes law, obviously. And Trump's definitely going to sign it into law, because obviously he's the one making it. You can see he just has a bunch of bullshit here, and basically 900 pages of just him lying. I'm not going to say lying, but basically it's attempting to solidify his political position and the ideas that he promised on the campaign trail, mostly. For instance, he's, where is it? Price loss coverage. I think that's what he's trying to do. Recession of amounts for forestry, selling land, obviously, modification of SNAP for work-body adults, reevaluation of thrifty food plan, basically cutting down on anything that isn't essential government stuff. And also, trying to reduce the debt burden again. Why is this something I can listen to? What? Oh, it's playing audio. Let's see what audio it's playing. Gaming headset on. Gaming mode on. Give it a minute. Is this gonna be an automatic voice or not?
There are 4 versions. Text available as XML/H2 megabytes.
Ah! What the fuck?
TXT.
What the fuck?
Megabytes.
Why is it destroying my fucking frame rate? Stop. Stop. No, stop. Please. I beg of you. Stop it. No. Ah. Stop. Anyways, you could see it's got a shit ton of things, and none of them are particularly useless. Useful, I should say. Unfortunate. Well, I guess that's bugged the fuck out, so, you know, fuck me, I guess. Well, anyway, he's basically tried to pass the big beautiful bill. And he has. It's passed the House. It should pass the Senate very easily. At this point, at least, as far as I understand. Backroom dealings are there, and even if it is a tie, obviously J.D. Vance can just come in and vote. But what's effectively happened is that his bill is coming into effect. And like the entire Trump presidency, first and second term, it can basically be described as the fucking following. Not necessarily bad idea. Absolutely dogshit execution. To the fact that I'm starting to believe we might be doing that. Oh god. Well, it's not one of my screens without me knocking something over. Is it now? The big beautiful bill sucks big beautiful dick. It's bad. I hate it. Let's see. Text HR1, 119th Congress. When she HR1. You can see he's reducing foodstuffs. He's trying to reduce government spending. He's fully stopped U.S. aid from being a thing. You can see how much stuff is included here. He's basically improving the quality of life for U.S. service personnel. Fuck right off. Basically, on the military end of things, Perun has made a very good video on what the current U.S. strategy effectively is for stuff, which is effectively fuck magazine depth, we making missiles. Which is definitely gonna work, because nobody has ever had an army mainly made of paper tiger, has he? Reduction in annual transfers to travel promotion fund. you can see he is just pulling everything to attempt to get some kind of money. Water conveyance and service water agreements. Committee on Public Works. Oh my god. You can see just how much funding he's completely destroying. And that's fine, in parts. But, again, the issue is he's basically throwing the entire US economy out the window with this. And it's gonna have a very mixed effect. Like, sure, it's probably gonna lead to a lot of short-term growth, but long-term, the kind of effect it would have is very questionable. And a lot, especially in regards to the army, basically the US army was actually initiated by Trump effectively from 2016 onwards, has been in a state of change from a counterinsurgency focused force whose main intent is obviously counterterrorism, low scale asymmetric combat, non and near peer opponents, and that kind of stuff. A world in which small numbers of highly accurate precision munitions are the deciding factor of battle, and nothing more than a company is ever actually engaged in conflict. And the change from that was obviously the army that started to be built in the 90s. The end of the large divisional-based U.S. army that was trying to fight for World War II and preparing to beat it out with the Soviets in Fulda. That goes away. Then you have this counterinsurgency force, and after Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine, the beginning of the current war, at that point, you start seeing a transition back towards a more organized structure, back towards a force made to fight peer and near-peer opponents. And by peer and near-peer opponents, I mean the Chinese at this point, because the Russians... Trump has continuously attempted to make allies of the Russians, like, a lot, you know. How am I... Basically, I think he's trying to play the Russians and the Chinese off in, like, the Kissinger maneuver. The issue is, for one, Kissinger's maneuver backfired because it fucked over Taiwan and the Chinese are still hostile, so good work there, Kissinger, you debilitating retard. And secondarily, the Kissinger split that was between Moscow and Peking wasn't made by the Americans, it was just the inevitable clash between Chinese and Russian interests, ultimately, in the Far East. Just the ideological ties between Stalin and Mao personally fell apart. So that's what Kissinger exploited to get the Chinese, well, not friendly to the US, but slowly start the process of reapproachment with communist China and the US. What he's basically doing currently is just bungling it by trying to do something similar between Moscow and Beijing, trying to use the Russians as a tool against China, ignoring the fact that in pretty much any conceivable universe, the Russians are always going to work with the Chinese to destroy the US and not the other way around. And just fucking over everything that's been done for Ukraine and that European allies have done, and very much shaking confidence in Europe's willingness to stand with the US, because it's becoming very questionable if the US would stand with Europe. Also, I love how all these are, haha, it's so nice. Yay, 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 and then you actually read this section, it's just, you know. It's just, we're cutting everything, fuck you, nigga. Anyway, what was I on that? Yeah. So, foreign policy-wise, basically, what the Trump administration started, has now diverged, effectively. The US Army is currently, at least it's my opinion, steadily building itself back into the pentomic fucking army, in which nukes are everything, and the only thing that matters is nukes and strategic bombers, and having more nukes than the Soviets, and having more strategic bombers than the Soviets, and everything's about nukes. And here's a fucking hint. The Pentomic Army program failed catastrophically when the US got engaged in multiple fucking insurgency conflicts, and it proved that actually nukes aren't useful for everything. And they're basically doing the same thing with missiles and AI. Oh, everything is AI drones, everything is missiles, everything. Artillery shells? Fucking who? Never heard of them. And instead of giving US allies in Ukraine desperately needed war material to wage war against the Russians, who are overtly hostile to the United States even now, after he's basically broken his back to please Putin, he's not building more, he's just refusing to give it to anybody else, building old stockpiles. Fun fact, the overwhelming majority of all the ammunition and stuff that the US sent over to Ukraine has A, already been paid for by US citizens in the fucking 90s, mainly, and B, is already nearing its expiry date, because, fun fact, artillery shells have an expiry date. Would you guess they're about 40 years? They're about 30 to 40 years, depending on which element you're talking about, because fuel degrade, warhead material degrade, the fuses fuck up. Basically, you can't stockpile an ammunition shell for 2 millennia and still expect it to work. Just ask the Russians what those North Korean shells have been doing and how many artillery pieces they have destroyed. I mean their own artillery pieces, not Ukrainian artillery pieces. The answer is staggeringly many. Because turns out, no, you can't keep a fucking explosive material stable for multiple decades. So a lot of the stuff that is being sent over to Ukraine is not new. It would have been stuff that had to be thrown away anyway, so the US saw it as an opportunity to put it to use. Which is why the fact that he's holding up war material and supplies destined for Ukraine so he can rebuild US stockpiles is farcical, because unless he expects war with China within the next few years, the overwhelming majority of that material has to be thrown out. So what's the fucking use of holding it? What, so it sits pretty? No, the use, obviously, is that it makes numbers go up. Sure, you might not have... Sure, you have 68 million 155mm howitzer shells. Now, don't mind the fact that half of them are near expiry, and God knows how well they'd work. You have 100 million, which means you don't need to build more, do ya? So you can build more missiles, or you can just not build anything else, and you can just focus all on missiles, because why would you ever do anything else? Basically, the only things the US is currently investing in, the US Army, is the NCAD, effectively, because it looks like the FAXX may be cut soon. And after that, missiles, endless fucking missiles, offensive missiles, defensive missiles, the Golden Dome, because Trump heard the words Golden Iron Dome and said, I want that, but make it gold so it's better. As Perón did, again, I'm just deferring to him for most of it because he actually has experience in the, defense sector. As he rightly pointed out, what Trump is attempting to accomplish is insanely stupid and non-practical. And I don't mean it in the sense that it's... Okay. Oh god, I'm getting very sleepy. It's not bad in the sense that having some kind of defense network for the US mainland is useful, because it is. The idea that you can somehow harden yourself against fucking nuclear strike from China is comedic. Like, it's completely insane. Attempting to say that it isn't is laughable, effectively. What Trump's attempting, say it with me now, good idea, shit execution. Having some kind of defensive system, not bad, same as reducing government spending, or cutting unnecessary government spending, or trying to reduce the welfare state, or attempting to shore up the US's international position. None of these are bad ideas, it's just the specific implementation of what he's trying to do is extremely retarded, in every conceivable sense. The best example is the military, obviously, but the fact that he's managed to shoot himself in the foot diplomatically multiple times in the past 6 months is really saying something. Because he's made every possible concession he reasonably could have to the Russians, short of just straight up saying, go and take Ukraine. Not that he wasn't willing to do that, because those secret talks weren't secret at all. Very much said, yeah, fuck it, take even NATO states were to fall under the Russian sphere of influence. He was willing to do all that, and the Russians are still not working with him. Because why would they? They hate the US, and they view it as an existential threat, and obviously they'll always work against the US. But, so effectively, the only thing his incredible gambit managed to achieve was ensuring that all US allies from here on out very much seriously considered whether the US would just sell them for a buck. Ingenious. Same with the military. Surely focusing on missiles, just on missiles and 6th generation fighters is a great idea. No, why do you need arms stockpiles? Why do you need magazine depth? Why would you need preparations for a long extended war? Missiles are gonna win everything, just like how air power was gonna win the Vietnam War, and nukes were gonna win the third one. Yeah. Basically, if the US Army continues going down the path it is currently, and it is going to go down, it is at very much risk of becoming a skeletal force that has really good offensive abilities for 2 weeks, after which point it will expend all its massive ordnance, cause massive damage to the Chinese, fail to knock the Chinese out, and then basically have to rely on the Taiwanese and Japanese, and the Koreans, to cook up some kind of defense, because they ain't going to be in a position for that. Basically, the current spending and policy goals of the US administration show a catastrophic failure to learn from what Ukraine is showing. Because they're adopting the technology seen in the Ukraine war, but they're adopting it on the surface level. They don't know why that technology is useful, they just see it and they want it. Oh, the ATACMS and long-range fires have proven invaluable in the Ukraine war. Well, to build more of them. Or what's that? General infantry assaults have proven broadly ineffective in a largely static fucking war. Oh, that surely means you don't need to, invest in the army. No. That means you build more missiles, obviously. It shows a lack of knowledge and understanding what the war actually fucking entails. The proof that Russia showed in the first few weeks that you can have as much advanced equipment as you want. If you are not able to take and hold ground, it is utterly irrelevant how many fancy missiles you got. And also that desperation is the mother of all ingenuity. The Ukrainians, lacking completely in Western support in the first few weeks of the war, managed to knock out massive casualties with both what was thought to be obsolete equipment, but also stuff that wasn't even seen in a military role at that point. At least not large-scale military use. Obviously, if you go back even to Syria, you can see the use of drones, but those were limited. Those were not organized and used en masse. They were individual occurrences. The US administration has not learned anything about the actual concept of modern war. They've just seen, oh, this technology does this well, so we need more of it, effectively, and that's the idea. It's the same thing as building those massive stockpiles of missiles to hit the Chinese. It's not that these aren't useful, it's that in a war with China, missiles are not going to be the deciding factor, it's whether they can take on all Taiwan, motherfucker. And that, ultimately, is going to be reduced to the Navy and boots on the ground. And boots on the ground, the US is in a bad position, and in an extended long war, it's not going to be pretty. And on the naval side, well, the US has failed to produce a modern destroyer or any modern surface combatant for the past 30 fucking years. That is catastrophic. Meanwhile, the Chinese have built a lot of ships and are even starting to get a carrier force. Don't get me wrong, the US Navy is still massive and strong, but that old age is going to start biting them in the butt in the conflict very quickly. Especially because they don't have a lot of shipbuilding facilities. Yeah, US shipbuilding facilities have basically disappeared. Norfolk in South Carolina, I think it's either North or South Carolina, is basically the only major shipyard still in operation. The only one which can build and maintain carriers, anyhow, and the US has 7 or 8 of them. I don't exactly recall how many at this point actively. That is terrible. The Chinese are just building more than the US. And that's the problem. The US would be capable in a war with China of doing immense damage in the first 2 or 3 weeks when the large-scale exchange of long-range fires happens. Yeah, absolutely. And then what? And then what? Then you're stuck in a long, extended, grueling conflict, and hopefully, you manage to stop the Chinese from actually making landfall in Taiwan. Because if you haven't, welcome to fucking Korea too, electric boogaloo, motherfucker. Not that the Korean front would stay static if the Chinese go to war. The North Koreans are definitely not wasting the opportunity. Like, I need to make it clear. A war with China is not going to stay a localized war on the Chinese coast for any meaningful amount of time. That will very quickly spiral out into world war. I'm not saying it's a fearmonger, I'm just saying the idea that the US can win the Chinese war, a war with China with just missiles, and that it somehow is going to win by hardening itself against missiles and building more missiles to hit the Chinese, is delusional. Much in the same sense that the idea that, oh, we're just going to use nukes to win is delusional. Or, oh, we're just going to use nuclear power, air power to win, failed in Vietnam. You cannot win a war on a single fucking gimmick. And what the US is doing is continuously refusing to build more magazine depth, continuously refusing to build more mass and bulk, which the Ukraine war above everything has shown. No matter how fancy your equipment and no matter how much of it you have, if your army lacks mass to take in all positions, it's as good as useless, fundamentally, against anything that isn't counterinsurgency force. And the war with China, if the US goes into it, will not be a fucking counterinsurgency. I can guarantee you that. My throat is getting really dry. My throat is getting quite dry. Basically, what I'm trying to say, again, is that the US is failing to meaningfully... No, it's not the US. US leadership under Trump is continuously failing to learn the lessons necessary to learn, and is instead taking the cheapest and easiest option it can think of, because building a fuck ton of missiles is a lot easier than rebuilding the entire army, and it seems that's what he's done. Because it's very clear from everything, from his tariff policies, to his tax cuts, to his lack of tax cuts, to his cutting of governmental agencies, to everything under the sun, the Trump administration is absolutely obsessed with reducing expenditure and increasing income. Everything can be justified and explained just by the fact that they're trying to save money, effectively. And the problem is, sure, money is important, and to say that the US is in a bad situation economically, at least the US government, would be an understatement. However, there are more pressing concerns than reducing spending at this point, motherfucker. You are not in the 90s anymore. The world is not America's playground. The world isn't safe. The world is rapidly careening towards disaster. And the only thing that can stop it is reasonable immediate action. Not immediate, but soon. And that's not something you can do by turning inwards, pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist, and attempting to cut corners wherever you can reasonably think you can get away with it. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Oh, no, it's not. Anyway, see ya. My throat is killing me. Which is why I'm ending stream. Because that's fucked up. So fucked up.